The highway stretched endlessly in front of me, pale gray, beneath a sky that couldn't decide between sunshine and storm. I had been driving since dawn, the kind of long drive that makes you feel both restless and numb at the same time. In the back seat, wrapped in layers of linen, sat a wooden keepsake box, something my father once carved with his own hands. Inside it, I'd placed a pair of silver candlesticks that had passed from my grandmother to me. Tonight, I planned to give them to Michael as a gesture of blessing for his engagement. My brother's house was 12 hours away, but I told myself the distance was nothing compared to the years we had once shared. When we were children, there had been no miles between us. I remembered sitting on the banks of Willow Creek with fishing poles too big for our hands, daring each other to catch the first trout. Michael always cheated, tugging his line to pretend he had a bite, and I would laugh until my sides ached. Somewhere between Ohio farmland and Kentucky hills, the memories kept me company. We had whispered secrets beneath quilted forts, invented stories on long car rides, and leaned on each other when our parents fought in the kitchen. I thought about those nights when Michael would sneak into my room after a nightmare, insisting he wasn't scared, only bored. That was the boy I wanted to see again, the one I was willing to drive half a day for. The hours grew heavier as the road narrowed into smaller towns. Gas stations blurred together, coffee cups stacked on the passenger seat. My shoulders ached, but my chest carried a stubborn hope. Whatever distance time had built between us, I believed this dinner could be a bridge. An engagement was more than a milestone. It was the start of a new family, a chance to remember the old bonds that mattered. When I finally crossed into his city, the sky had gone soft and gray, the kind that held its breath before rain. I adjusted the keepsake box on the seat beside me and whispered to myself, as if the candlesticks could hear, "This is worth it." By the time I turned onto Michael's street, I felt the weight of exhaustion mingling with anticipation, both pressing against my ribs as I pulled into his driveway. The neighborhood was quiet when I pulled into the driveway, the kind of place where every lawn looked clipped to the same length, where porches carried identical wreaths. Michael's house stood taller than I expected, all clean lines and sharp angles, nothing like the home we grew up in. I sat for a moment with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, telling myself the long drive had been worth it. The wooden keepsake box felt heavier when I lifted it from the seat. I straightened my shoulders, walked up the steps, and knocked. For a few seconds, I heard nothing but the faint sound of laughter from inside. Then the door swung open. Emily stood there, her hand still on the knob, eyes widening just enough to betray surprise before settling into something cooler. She looked past me, as if checking whether anyone else was there then, back at the box in my arms. "I brought something for the engagement dinner," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. She tilted her head, lips curving into a thin smile. "Oh," she said lightly, "they had the dinner yesterday." Her words landed like stones, each one sinking deeper. I blinked, thinking I must have misheard. "Yesterday. Just close family," she added, almost as an afterthought, though her eyes didn't waver from mine. The box pressed into my arms until it seemed to burn. Behind her, I caught the sound of glasses, clinking chairs, scraping the hum of people I wasn't meant to see. I stood frozen, the threshold between us more solid than any wall. Emily's smile didn't change, but she didn't move aside either. For a moment, I thought Michael might appear behind her, that he would laugh and say it was all a mix-up, but the seconds stretched and no one came. Emily shifted her weight and said almost politely, "Maybe another time." Then the door closed quiet and final, leaving me alone on the porch, with nothing but the weight in my arms and the echo of voices that no longer included mine. I sat back in the driver's seat, the keepsake box on the passenger side, like an accusation I couldn't look away from. My arms still ached from holding it on the porch, waiting for a welcome that never came. The porch light glowed behind me, but no one opened the door again. No voice called my name. Sarah. Only laughter drifted faintly through the walls, muffled and distant, as though I had already been erased from the picture. I stared at my phone, half expecting a message from Michael. Some hurried explanation, or at least an apology. Nothing. The screen stayed dark, the silence heavier than words could ever be. My mind began to turn through the years, unspooling small moments. I had folded away the birthday I drove hours to surprise him, only to find he had gone hiking with Emily's family. The calls he promised to return, but never did. The weekend I covered a bill he swore he'd handle. Each memory came back with the same quiet ending, me waiting him absent. I started the engine and pulled away the sound of tires on gravel filling the space where conversation should have been. The streets blurred into sameness, houses trimmed in perfect symmetry. Families gathered behind curtains. Each lighted window was a reminder of where I didn't belong. By the time I reached the edge of town, the highway stretched out like a dark ribbon leading me nowhere in particular. I couldn't face the long drive home that night, not with the box still unopened beside me. I pulled into a roadside motel, its neon sign buzzing weakly against the dusk. Inside the room, the silence stayed with me. I set the box on the table untouched and lay back on the stiff mattress. My eyes stayed open, tracing cracks on the ceiling as old memories pressed against the rejection still raw in my chest. What once had been laughter and secrets between siblings was now only the sound of a door closing, leaving me with nothing but quiet I hadn't chosen. The motel night bled into morning, leaving me restless and hollow. By the time I finally drove back home, the house felt colder than usual, the stillness almost deliberate. I set the keepsake box on the hall table, unable to meet its gaze, and went straight to the drawer I rarely opened. It was a plain wooden drawer in my desk, but I knew exactly what it held: the quiet history of every sacrifice I had made for Michael. The first envelope I pulled out was marked with smudged ink, the loan agreement I had written by hand when he asked for help starting his first business. $12,000 money I had scraped together from savings meant for repairs on my roof. He promised me he'd pay it back within a year, swore it was the beginning of something solid. That business closed before the ink on his plans had dried, and the repayment never came. Beneath it was another stack of paper's property tax notices stamped in red. The year he called nearly in tears because he and Emily were about to lose the house in Asheville. I wired $27,000 the next morning without hesitation. He said he'd never forget what I did for him, that he'd make it right as soon as they got back on their feet. I never mentioned it again, even as the months turned into years. And then there was the credit card, the one in my name, that he carried just for emergencies. The balance had grown and shrunk over time, but the pattern never changed: dinners, flights, things I never asked about. Every month I paid it, telling myself it was easier than starting a fight. I laid the papers across the desk one by one, the numbers staring back like a tally of misplaced trust. Each promise echoed in my mind. I'll pay you back. I won't forget this. You won't regret it. Yet here I was, sitting in a quiet house, the drawer open like a confession, the papers blurred in front of me, and for the first time in years, I wondered if my devotion had not only cost me money, but the very respect I thought it had earned. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the documents still spread before me. The numbers no longer looked like help. They looked like chains I had willingly clasped around my own wrists. The thought made my stomach turn. I picked up the credit card and held it in my hand. The plastic felt worn, the edges softened from years of being pulled from his wallet, swiped at counters I'd never see, paying for meals I'd never taste. My name, Sarah, was printed across it, yet it had never really belonged to me. I reached for the phone and dialed the number on the back. The voice on the other end was polite, efficient, asking me to confirm my decision. Yes, I said, steady and clear, cancel it, effective immediately. A few keystrokes later, the line went silent, and so did the weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I sat back in the chair, the air around me sharper, freer. For years, I had told myself that sacrifice was love, that covering his debts, bailing him out, keeping the card open, all meant I was a good sister. But love, twisted into obligation, stops looking like love at all. It starts looking like weakness. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to press in on me after David passed. Tonight it felt different, less hollow, more like space being returned to me. I thought about the years I'd equated devotion with silence, the times I let guilt dictate my choices. Maybe respect had never been missing from him. It had been missing from me. When I finally went to bed, I expected the churn of regret to keep me awake. Instead, I closed my eyes and drifted quickly into sleep, my chest unburdened. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I slept without dreaming of doors shutting in my face. By morning, I woke to a clarity I hadn't known I was capable of carrying. 5 days passed before the phone finally rang. I was trimming the last of the late summer roses in the garden when I saw Michael's name flash across the screen. For a moment, I simply watched it ring, remembering all the times I had called him only to be ignored. This time, I let it buzz twice before I answered. "Sarah," he said, his voice sharp and uneven. "The card doesn't work." "Did you forget to pay?" There was no greeting, no pause, just panic pressed into words. I could hear voices in the background, Emily urgent and clipped, and the muffled sound of someone knocking, perhaps a vendor at the door. A baby wailed somewhere in the house. Papers shuffled. The edges of his world sounded frayed, unraveling. "I tried it 3 times, he continued, breath quick. "They said it was declined. We've got bills here. People waiting. What's going on?" I felt the moment settle over me like a still pond. No racing pulse, no immediate scramble to fix it. Just calm. The same card that had once tethered me to his emergencies no longer bound me. "I canceled it," I said quietly. He fell silent, the line crackling between us. Then came the sound of disbelief, the incredulous half-laugh I knew so well. What, Sarah? You can't just— How are we supposed to— I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of cut roses. "It was never supposed to be yours, Michael." His words tumbled, shifting from anger to pleading. "Just until I sort things out. I'll pay you back, I swear this time. Don't leave me hanging like this. Please." But nothing in me stirred to answer that old call. I let the silence expand, filling the space where my fear used to live. He waited, expecting the version of me who always rushed to soften the blow. She was gone. "I forgot," I said at last, my tone steady. Before he could reply, I ended the call. The roses at my feet looked brighter somehow, their petals open to the fading sun, as if they knew a weight had shifted. The calls didn't stop after that first one. Michael rang again within the hour, and then again the next morning. Each time his voice shifted, bending between tones like a man trying on masks. At first, there was anger, the clipped, sharp syllables meant to corner me. Then came reason, his words softened, drawing on the old rhythm of persuasion I'd known since we were children. Finally, desperation, the voice of a boy asking me not to leave him behind. I listened to him cycle through it all the same way I had listened so many times before. I remembered the way he used to smile when he needed something, how he could weave his charm into guilt until I couldn't tell one from the other. For years it had worked. I had believed in him even when I shouldn't, mistaking his need for closeness as proof of love. But standing in my kitchen now, phone pressed to my ear, I realized the spell was broken. His charm no longer warmed me. It only reminded me of how much I had given away without question. "Sarah," he said again, his voice breaking. "You don't understand what's at stake. Just a little more time." I closed my eyes, letting the quiet stretch between us until his words thinned into static. Then I spoke soft enough that even I could hear the difference in myself. "Oh, I forgot." The silence that followed was heavier than his anger, sharper than his pleading. Before he could find a reply, I ended the call. The house settled around me, no longer heavy, just still. I stood for a moment with the phone in my hand, feeling the ground steady beneath me in a way it hadn't for years. For once, the choice was mine, and it was not to save him, but to save myself. I set the phone on the counter, turned toward the window, and watched the last light of the day fade into the horizon, knowing the silence between us had shifted into something irreversible. The messages started 2 days later, long strings of words that tried to stitch themselves into excuses. Michael's tone swung wildly. First guilt, then sorrow, then promises lined with familiar desperation. "I never meant to hurt you," one read. Another followed with, "You know I'll pay you back this time. Just don't give up on me." And then, "Families shouldn't turn their back when things get hard." I read each one without replying. The sentences all blurred into the same hollow refrain I had heard for years. They carried weight once enough to bend me back into silence. Now they sounded thin, like echoes bouncing in an empty room. When I opened my phone to distract myself, Emily's world appeared bright and polished across the screen. Photos of dinner parties, glasses raised high, her captions full of joy. She tagged Michael in every one, their smiles flawless, their table crowded. There was no sign of bills unpaid, no trace of calls left unanswered, no shadow of the panic I had heard in his voice. It was a performance as much for themselves as for anyone watching. They could erase me from the story with a smile just as they had shut the door in my face. The thought no longer pierced me. It clarified. Their love had never been love without strings. It had been a leash looped tighter each time I gave. I set the phone down and let the silence return. For the first time, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like distance I had chosen. The keepsake box still sat untouched on the hallway table, its polished wood catching the afternoon light. I brushed my hand over it and felt no urgency to deliver it anymore. It was mine until I decided otherwise. Outside, the air carried the crisp edge of approaching autumn, and I realized the season was shifting around me as surely as I was shifting within it. The life I had lived at their mercy was closing like a chapter, and something steadier was beginning to take its place. The weeks that followed moved with a quieter rhythm. Without Michael's card charges slipping into my statements, I saw numbers I hadn't seen in years. What had once been swallowed by his debts now belonged to me again, and the shift felt like opening a window in a room I hadn't realized was suffocating. The first choice I made was practical. I sent an extra payment toward my mortgage, watching the balance drop with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with control. Each payment was a small declaration that this house, this roof, was mine because of my effort, not because I had left myself second to someone else's needs. The second choice was for joy. I signed up for an art class at the community center, something I had always postponed because there wasn't money to spare. I walked into that bright room on a Thursday evening, the smell of paint and clay filling the air, and took a seat among strangers who carried their own quiet longings. Holding a brush in my hand again felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had set aside too long. The third choice was for others. I wrote a check to the women's shelter downtown, anonymous and quiet, no need for recognition. I knew what it felt like to give without being seen. But this time, it wasn't about being erased. It was about standing with people who deserved to know they weren't alone. Each act was small on its own, but together they felt like a new balance being drawn. What had once been taken without thanks was now building something solid, something that belonged entirely to me. And as autumn deepened, I found myself ready for what came next. The call came late, long after the house had settled into its familiar stillness. Michael's voice was low-heavy with something that might have been regret, though I couldn't be sure. He stumbled through words about mistakes, about pressures I couldn't understand, about wanting to make things right. I let him speak, my silence no longer a cage, but a boundary. When he finally paused, waiting for me to soften, I said only that I heard him. I didn't offer more. After we hung up, I walked to the hallway where the keepsake box still rested. For weeks, it had sat in plain sight, a reminder of what I had meant to give him, what I had once believed would carry our family's history forward. I lifted it gently, carried it to my study, and opened the cabinet drawer where I kept the things that mattered most. Sliding it inside, I locked the drawer with a small brass key. It no longer felt like a gift withheld. It felt like preservation waiting for someone who would understand its weight and treat it with the reverence it deserved. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the drawer, realizing that legacies aren't inherited by blood alone. They are earned by respect, guarded by care, and passed on to those who prove worthy of holding them. For years, I had equated family with obligation, love with sacrifice, silence with loyalty. Now I saw them for what they were, choices I could make differently, and in that realization, I felt the ground beneath me steady. I turned off the light in the study and walked toward the quiet of my room, carrying with me not loss, but a new certainty of what it meant to belong. Sarah learns a profound lesson about the difference between love and obligation, realizing that true devotion requires mutual respect, not unilateral sacrifice. For years, she equated family loyalty with silent endurance, absorbing financial and emotional burdens to support her brother Michael, believing it proved her love. His dismissal of her at his engagement dinner after her 12-hour drive exposes the one-sided nature of their bond. By canceling the credit card and refusing to continue enabling him, Sarah reclaims her agency, understanding that love twisted into obligation becomes a chain, not a connection. She discovers that respect begins with herself setting boundaries and prioritizing her own needs, like paying her mortgage, pursuing art, and giving to others without expectation. The keepsake box once meant for Michael becomes a symbol of her self-preservation, locked away for someone who values its weight. Sarah's journey teaches her that family ties are not defined by blood or blind giving, but by mutual care and accountability. In choosing silence not out of weakness but as a boundary, she finds a steady sense of belonging within herself, redefining love as a choice that honors her own worth.
Christmas Eve dinner at the Morrison family estate had always been a formal affair, but this year felt different. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, watching my family exchange meaningful glances. My father, William Morrison, cleared his throat and set down his wine glass with deliberate ceremony. At 62, he still commanded attention in any room, his silver hair perfectly styled and his three-piece suit immaculate even for a family dinner. "Before we continue with dessert, I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had built Morrison Industries into a regional powerhouse. "I've been meeting with our estate attorney about succession planning." My stepmother Patricia smiled smugly, while my half-brother Marcus and half-sister Jessica exchanged excited looks. I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach tightened. As you all know, I've built Morrison Industries from a small construction company into what it is today, a $50 million enterprise that employs over 300 people. Dad's eyes swept the table, landing on me last. "I believe in merit-based succession." Marcus leaned forward eagerly. At 30, he'd been groomed his entire life to take over the family business. "What have you decided, Dad?" "The bulk of my estate, the company, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, will be divided between Marcus and Jessica." Dad's voice was firm and final. "They've both proven themselves capable of carrying on the Morrison legacy." Jessica nodded seriously. At 28, she'd always been the perfect daughter: Harvard MBA, strategic consulting experience, everything Dad valued in a potential successor. "What about Emma?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. All eyes turned to me. At 29, I was the oldest of Dad's children, but also the product of his first marriage, the one that had ended in what he called an expensive lesson in poor judgment. Dad's expression hardened. "Emma has made it clear through her choices that she doesn't value what this family has built. She's chosen to pursue her own path, independent of family support or guidance." "Dad, I've never said I didn't value." "Haven't you?" he interrupted. "You refused the executive position I offered you at Morrison Industries. You turned down the MBA program I was willing to fund. You've spent the last 7 years playing around with computers instead of building something meaningful." Marcus smirked. "The tech entrepreneur phase has been going on for quite a while now, hasn't it, Emma?" "She's living in that tiny apartment downtown," Jessica added with false concern. "I worry she's not being realistic about her future." Patricia nodded sympathetically. "It's admirable to follow your dreams, dear, but at some point you have to face reality." Dad leaned back in his chair, his decision clearly final. "Emma, you don't deserve to inherit anything from this family. You've rejected everything we stand for: hard work, traditional business principles, family loyalty. The inheritance will go to children who understand the value of what I've built." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Jessica tried to look sympathetic, but I could see the satisfaction in their eyes. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with her napkin as if this was a difficult but necessary decision. "Does everyone agree with this assessment?" Dad asked, looking around the table. One by one they nodded. Marcus and Jessica nodded enthusiastically. Patricia nodded with feigned sadness. Even my Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, who rarely spoke up at family gatherings, nodded their agreement. "Then it's settled," Dad announced. "The will has been updated accordingly." I sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just happened. 7 years of building my business, 7 years of polite questions about when I'd get serious about my career, 7 years of being treated like the family disappointment had led to this moment. "Emma." Jessica's voice was gentle, but I could hear the underlying triumph. "Are you okay? I know this must be disappointing, but you'll understand when you're older. Dad's just trying to be responsible." I pulled out my phone and opened my investment app. The numbers glowed back at me. $127,342,891.73 in liquid assets across various portfolios. Without saying a word, I turned the phone around and placed it in the center of the table where everyone could see the screen. The reaction was instantaneous. Dad's wine glass slipped from his fingers, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Patricia's mouth fell open in a perfect O of shock. Marcus leaned forward so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. What is that? Jessica whispered, staring at the numbers on my phone. That's my investment portfolio, I said calmly. Current value as of market close today, $127.3 million. Dad's face had gone completely pale. That can't be real. I swiped to another screen showing my business holdings. This is my stake in Cloud Vault Technologies, the cybersecurity company I founded 4 years ago. We were acquired by Tech Global last month for $340 million. My 60% ownership stake netted me $204 million before taxes. Marcus was shaking his head frantically. No, Emma, that's impossible. You live in a tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. I live simply because I choose to. The apartment is actually a penthouse that I own along with the entire building. The Honda is reliable and efficient for city driving. I also own a Tesla Model S for longer trips, but I rarely need it since I work from home most days. Patricia found her voice. But we thought your computer business was just a hobby. A phase you were going through. Cloud Vault Technologies employed 847 people before the acquisition. We provided cybersecurity solutions to Fortune 500 companies including 3 major banks, 2 healthcare systems and a government defense contractor. I swiped to another screen showing my real estate holdings. I also own commercial real estate in downtown Portland, Seattle and San Francisco, valued at approximately $78 million combined. Dad was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. How is this possible? Hard work, Dad. Traditional business principles. Everything you taught me, actually. I looked around the table at their stunned faces. The difference is I applied those principles to industries you didn't understand. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. You're worth over $300 million? After taxes and reinvestment, my current net worth is approximately $290 million. But that's not the shocking part. Everyone leaned forward. I swiped to a new screen on my phone. This is the Morrison Industries acquisition proposal I received 3 weeks ago from Preston Development Group. Dad's face went from pale to gray. What acquisition proposal? Preston wants to buy Morrison Industries. They've offered $47 million for the company, which is actually quite generous considering your revenue decline over the past 2 years. Marcus was shaking his head. That's impossible. We haven't heard from any Preston Development Group. That's because they sent their initial inquiry to me. You see, I own Preston Development Group. The silence was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You own the company that wants to buy Morrison Industries? Dad's voice was hoarse. I founded Preston Development Group 18 months ago as my real estate and construction investment arm. When my research team identified Morrison Industries as an undervalued acquisition target, I had them prepare a formal offer. Patricia's hands were shaking. You were going to buy Williams' company? I was considering it. Morrison Industries has good bones but poor management and outdated technology systems. With proper investment and modernization, it could be worth twice what I offered. Dad seemed to be struggling to breathe. You looked at my company like a business opportunity? I look at all undervalued assets as potential opportunities, Dad. That's how I built my wealth. I turned the phone back toward myself and closed the app. But here's the thing, I never intended to actually purchase Morrison Industries. What do you mean? Marcus asked frantically. I was planning to offer it back to you, Dad, for $1. After I modernized the systems, expanded the client base and secured the company's future, I was going to gift it back to the family. Jessica was crying now. Why would you do that? Because despite everything, you're still my family. I may not have valued your approval, but I've always valued your well-being. Dad's voice was broken. We just disinherited you because we thought you were a failure. I know. But you're more successful than all of us combined. Success isn't a competition, Dad. At least it shouldn't be within a family. Uncle Robert finally spoke up. Emma, why didn't you ever tell us about your achievements? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because every time I tried to share good news about my business, I was told it wasn't real work, or that I should focus on something more stable. Eventually, I stopped trying to explain what I was building. Aunt Linda was dabbing at her eyes. We thought you were struggling. We were worried about you. I appreciate that you were worried. But none of you ever asked me directly about my finances or my business success. You made assumptions based on my lifestyle choices. Marcus leaned back in his chair looking defeated. The tiny apartment, the old car, the simple clothes. We thought those were signs of failure. They're signs of someone who doesn't define themselves by material possessions. I live comfortably, but I don't live extravagantly. Most of my wealth is invested in growing businesses and real estate, not luxury items. Dad was staring at his hands. Emma, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. Dad, you don't. Yes, I do. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I just disinherited my most successful child because I was too proud and too stubborn to see what you had accomplished. Patricia was sobbing openly now. Emma, we're so sorry. We misjudged everything. The real question, I said gently, is where do we go from here? Jessica wiped her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, do we let this moment divide our family further, or do we use it as an opportunity to build something better? Dad's voice was shaky. What are you proposing? I pulled out a folder from my purse. I had my attorney prepare some documents before I came to dinner tonight. I had a feeling this conversation might happen. Marcus eyed the folder warily. What kind of documents? Trust documents. I'm establishing the Morrison Family Trust with an initial funding of $50 million. The trust will provide for family members' education, healthcare, housing, and business ventures for the next 3 generations. The table was silent except for Patricia's quiet crying. Additionally, I continued, I'm moving forward with the modernization plan for Morrison Industries, but instead of acquiring it, I'm offering a partnership. My company will provide the capital and technology upgrades, while the Morrison family retains ownership and control. Dad was shaking his head in disbelief. After what we just did to you, you're offering to save our business? I'm offering to strengthen our business, Dad. All of our businesses. When family members succeed, the whole family benefits. Jessica reached across the table and took my hand. Emma, this is incredibly generous, but we don't deserve this. Deserve is a complicated word, Jess. Do any of us really deserve the circumstances we're born into? Do we deserve our talents, our opportunities, our lucky breaks? I squeezed her hand. What matters is what we do with what we've been given. Marcus was studying the documents. This trust. It's designed to help family members start businesses. Among other things. Education funding, seed capital for entrepreneurs, emergency assistance, healthcare support. I want our family to be a launching pad for success, not a safety net that enables complacency. Dad wiped his eyes with his napkin. How do we make this right, Emma? How do we rebuild our relationship with you? By starting over. By asking questions instead of making assumptions. By celebrating each other's successes instead of dismissing them. Uncle Robert spoke up again. Emma, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you happy? With all this success, all this wealth, are you happy? I considered the question seriously. I'm satisfied with my work and I'm proud of what I've built. But the happiest moments in my life have always been family moments, birthdays, holidays, celebrations. That's what I've missed most over the past few years. Patricia looked up through her tears. We've missed you too, dear. We didn't know how to bridge the gap. The gap was built on misunderstanding, I said. We can tear it down the same way. Dad reached for the trust documents. May I look at these? Of course. But Dad, there's one condition to all of this. The table tensed. No more assumptions about anyone's life or choices. If you want to know how someone is doing, ask them directly. If they share good news, celebrate it. If they share challenges, offer support. We be a family that lifts each other up. Jessica nodded emphatically. Absolutely. Emma, I'm so sorry for how dismissive we've been. We all made mistakes, Jess. The important thing is learning from them. Marcus was reading through the trust documents. This is This is incredibly comprehensive. You've thought of everything. I've had time to think about what kind of family I want us to be. Tonight just gave me the motivation to make it happen. Dad set down the documents and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since I was a child, pure pride. Emma, I need you to know something. I've never been more proud of you than I am right now. Because of the money? No. Because of the woman you've become. The grace you're showing us, the generosity, the way you're handling this situation. That's not about wealth. That's about character. Patricia nodded through her tears. We raised an incredible daughter, and then we were too blind to see what we had accomplished. You raised all of us to be strong and independent, I said. Maybe too independent sometimes. But the foundation was solid. Aunt Linda raised her wine glass. To Emma and to second chances. As we toasted, I felt something I hadn't experienced with my family in years. Genuine connection and mutual respect. Later, as we moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, Dad pulled me aside. Emma, can I ask you something? Anything. What made you decide to establish the family trust? You could have just walked away after tonight. I thought about his question, looking around the room where I'd grown up, where I'd learned about business and hard work and family loyalty, even if those lessons had gotten complicated over the years. Because this is where I learned that success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with. You taught me that, Dad, even if you forgot it for a while. He hugged me tightly. I'm sorry it took nearly losing you for me to remember. You didn't lose me, Dad. I've been here all along. You just weren't looking in the right place. Over the next few hours, the atmosphere in the house completely transformed. Instead of the tense, formal dinner we'd started with, we found ourselves having the kind of honest, warm family conversation we hadn't shared in years. Marcus talked about his struggles with feeling like he could never live up to Dad's expectations. Jessica shared her fears about taking over family business responsibilities she wasn't sure she was ready for. Dad admitted that he'd been so focused on protecting what he'd built that he'd stopped seeing the potential for growth and change. Emma, Jessica said as we were getting ready to leave, I have one more question. What's that? The cybersecurity company you built. How did you know that industry was going to be so lucrative? I smiled, remembering the countless hours I'd spent researching market trends and technological developments while my family thought I was playing with computers. I didn't know for certain. But I studied the data, identified the trends, and made calculated risks based on solid research. The same principles Dad taught me about construction. You study the foundation, plan carefully, and build something that will last. Dad nodded slowly. I should have recognized those principles in your work. Maybe. But I also should have been better at explaining what I was building in terms you could understand. As I drove home that night, I thought about the evening's revelations. In a way, getting disinherited had been the best thing that could have happened to our family. It had forced all of us to confront our assumptions, our prejudices, and our failures to truly see each other. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Thank you for showing us what real family leadership looks like. I'm proud to be your father. I smiled, pulling into the parking garage of my building, the building I owned in the heart of downtown, with a view of the city I'd helped reshape through my investments. Tomorrow we'd start the real work of rebuilding our family relationships. There would be legal documents to finalize, business partnerships to structure, and years of misunderstandings to work through. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I had my family back. And that was worth more than all the investment portfolios in the world. As I walked into my penthouse apartment, I looked out at the city lights and smiled. Sometimes the best gifts came disguised as the worst moments. Tonight, getting disinherited had led to something far more valuable than any inheritance. A family that finally understood the difference between success and worth, between wealth and value, between what you have and who you are. And that understanding, I knew, would be the foundation for building something even better together. The call came 3 days before my MBA graduation from Stanford. Alexandra, honey, we have a problem. Mom's voice carried that apologetic tone I'd learned to dread over the years. I was in my Palo Alto apartment, reviewing the final details for the donation ceremony that would take place during graduation. As the anonymous founder of Aurora Ventures, a biotech investment firm worth over $400 million, I'd decided it was time to give back to the institution that had shaped my business thinking. What kind of problem, Mom? Well, you know your cousin Jessica is getting engaged this weekend, right? Jessica. My 25-year-old cousin who had dropped out of college twice and was now working as a social media influencer with 12,000 followers. The family's current golden child because she'd managed to snag a boyfriend with a trust fund. I heard something about that, yes. The engagement party is Saturday at the country club. The whole family is going to be there. Your Aunt Patricia flew in from Denver. Uncle Robert is driving up from Phoenix. It's going to be such a beautiful celebration. My stomach sank. Mom, my graduation is Saturday. Oh honey, I know, and we feel terrible about this. But Jessica only gets engaged once and family has to support family, right? And I only graduate from Stanford once. Sweetie, you'll understand when you're older. Jessica needs the family there for her big moment. Your graduation is wonderful, of course, but it's just a ceremony. You already have your degree. I walked to my window overlooking the Stanford campus, the place where I'd spent 2 years not just earning an MBA, but building the relationships and knowledge that had helped me grow Aurora Ventures from a small investment fund into a major player in biotech financing. So none of you are coming to my graduation. We'll be there in spirit. And we'll take you out for a nice dinner next week to celebrate properly. Mom, I'm giving the student address at graduation. I'm speaking to the entire graduating class. That's wonderful, dear. We'll have Jessica live stream the engagement party so you can feel like you're part of the family celebration too. I almost laughed at the irony. You want me to watch Jessica's engagement party while I'm giving my graduation speech? Well, not during your speech, obviously. But afterwards. Jessica said she'd make sure to get footage of the whole party. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the pattern that had defined my relationship with my family for years. Every achievement I'd earned, scholarships, academic honors, business success, had been overshadowed by whatever cousin was doing something the family considered more important. When I'd graduated summa cum laude from UC Berkeley, the family had skipped my ceremony to attend my cousin Mark's community college graduation party. When I'd been featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list for my work in biotech investing, the family dinner conversation had focused entirely on Jessica's new Instagram sponsorship deal. What my family didn't know was that the small investment job they thought I had was actually a biotech venture capital firm that I'd founded with profits from an early investment in a promising gene therapy startup. Aurora Ventures now managed over $400 million in assets and had funded 12 companies that were revolutionizing medical treatment. They also didn't know that I'd been planning to announce a major donation to Stanford during graduation, a $200 million gift to establish the Aurora Institute for Biotech Innovation, which would fund research into treatments for rare diseases. I'd kept my success quiet partly out of habit and partly because every time I tried to share professional achievements with my family, the conversation had immediately shifted to someone else's news. Eventually I'd stopped trying to explain what I was building. But this time felt different. This time, their choice to prioritize Jessica's engagement party over my Stanford MBA graduation wasn't just disappointing, it was revealing. I called Dean Harrison's office. Ms. Zhang, how can I help you? Dean Harrison, I wanted to confirm the details for Saturday's donation ceremony. Will it be part of the graduation livestream? Absolutely. The ceremony will be broadcast live on the university website and social media channels. This is such a significant gift. I expect it will generate quite a bit of media attention. Perfect. And the announcement will include the donor's name. Yes, as we discussed, you've decided to step forward as the public face of Aurora Ventures. The announcement will identify you as both the founder of Aurora Ventures and the donor of the Aurora Institute. Excellent. Dean Harrison, can I ask a favor? Of course. When you make the announcement, could you mention that this donation represents not just an investment in Stanford's future, but a celebration of how education can transform lives? I'd like it to be clear that this gift comes from someone who believes in the power of family support and institutional excellence working together. That's a beautiful sentiment. I'll make sure to include that. Saturday morning, I put on my graduation gown and walked across campus to the ceremony. The auditorium was packed with families celebrating their graduates, and I tried not to think about the empty seats where my parents, brother, and extended family should have been sitting. I took my place with the other MBA graduates and watched as families filled the auditorium with flowers, cameras, and proud smiles. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. OMG, the country club is so beautiful. Wish you could be here. 2 hearts. The ceremony began with the usual speeches and recognitions. I delivered my student address about the responsibility that comes with business education and the importance of using success to create opportunity for others. As I spoke, I could see Dean Harrison in the wings, holding a large ceremonial check. After the academic recognitions were complete, Dean Harrison took the podium. Before we conclude today's ceremony, I have a very special announcement to make. Stanford has received the largest single donation in our business school's history, a gift that will transform how we approach biotech innovation and rare disease research. He gestured for me to join him on stage, and I walked over, trying to ignore the butterflies in my stomach. We are honored to accept a $200 million donation to establish the Aurora Institute for Biotech Innovation. This unprecedented gift comes from someone who embodies the Stanford spirit of excellence, innovation, and service to humanity. I could see people in the audience starting to pay closer attention, phones coming out to record what was clearly a significant moment. The donor is not just a Stanford alumna, but a pioneering entrepreneur who has built one of the most successful biotech investment firms in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Alexandra Zhang, founder and CEO of Aurora Ventures, for her extraordinary generosity. The auditorium erupted in applause as Dean Harrison handed me the ceremonial check. I looked out at the crowd of families celebrating their graduates and felt a moment of sadness that my own family had chosen to be elsewhere. Ms. Zhang has asked me to share that this donation represents her belief in the power of education to transform lives, and her hope that the Aurora Institute will create treatments that give hope to families facing rare diseases. This gift celebrates the importance of family support and institutional excellence working together. As I accepted the check and waved to the crowd, I noticed several people in the audience taking photos and videos. In the age of social media, I knew this moment would be shared widely within hours. After the ceremony, I was surrounded by classmates, faculty, and reporters wanting to know more about Aurora Ventures and the donation. I spent an hour answering questions about biotech investing, the future of rare disease research, and my plans for the Aurora Institute. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the interviews, but I hadn't had a chance to check it. Finally, during a brief break, I looked at my messages. The first was from my brother Kevin. "Alex, are you on TV right now? Someone at the party just showed us a live stream of your graduation and you're giving away $200 million? The second was from my mom. "Alexandra, we need to talk. Your father just saw a news article about you donating money to Stanford. How much money do you have?" The third was from Jessica. "OMG Alex, everyone at my party is talking about you instead of my engagement. Why didn't you tell us you were rich?" I scrolled through dozens more messages from relatives, family, friends, and people I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, news of the donation had spread quickly through social media, and multiple family members had shared the Stanford livestream at Jessica's engagement party. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Alexandra, what is going on? We just watched you give Stanford $200 million on live television." "I donated money to establish a research institute, yes. But where did you get $200 million? What kind of work do you actually do?" I walked across campus toward my car, tired after the long day and not particularly interested in explaining my career to people who had skipped my graduation to attend a party. "I own an investment firm, Mom. I told you that. But you said it was small. You said you worked in finance." I said I worked in venture capital focusing on biotech investments. Aurora Ventures manages over $400 million in assets. $400 million? Her voice was faint. "Alexandra, are you telling me you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars?" "My personal net worth is approximately $280 million, yes. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive an old car. You never act like you have money." "I live in a 1,200 square foot apartment in Palo Alto because it's close to work and meets my needs. I drive a reliable car because I care more about functionality than status symbols. And I don't act like I have money because my wealth doesn't define my personality. Why didn't you tell us?" I stopped walking and looked back at the Stanford campus, at the buildings and programs that had shaped my thinking about business, innovation, and social responsibility. "When exactly would I have told you, Mom?" "During the family dinners where conversation focuses entirely on Jessica's Instagram posts? During the holiday gatherings where my business updates get interrupted so everyone can hear about Mark's new job? We would have listened if we knew it was important. Everything I've achieved has been important. You just never bothered to ask follow-up questions or show genuine interest in what I was building. My father's voice joined the call. Alexandra, we're leaving Jessica's party right now. We need to talk about this. You're leaving the engagement party? Yes, we're driving back to the city tonight. Can we meet for dinner? I thought about their request. 6 hours ago, they couldn't be bothered to attend my MBA graduation because Jessica's party was more important. Now suddenly they wanted to rush back for family time because they'd discovered I was wealthy. I'm not available tonight. I have plans with my classmates to celebrate our graduation. Tomorrow then? We'll drive down to Palo Alto. Why the sudden urgency to see me? Because we just learned that our daughter is incredibly successful and we missed her graduation to attend a party, Mom said, her voice breaking. Because we made a terrible mistake and we want to make it right. You made a choice based on your priorities, Mom. Jessica's engagement party was more important to you than my Stanford graduation. That choice revealed something important about how you see me and my achievements. We didn't know your graduation was such a big deal. It was my MBA graduation from Stanford where I was giving the student address. How was that not a big deal? Dad's voice was quiet. We thought it was just another graduation ceremony. We didn't realize you were. We didn't understand what you'd accomplished. That's exactly the problem. You didn't ask. You didn't try to understand. You just assumed my achievements were less important than Jessica's social events. Alexandra, what can we do to fix this? I got into my car and sat for a moment thinking about their question. I don't know if you can fix it, Dad. This isn't just about missing my graduation. This is about years of treating my success as background noise while celebrating everyone else's minor milestones. But we're proud of you. We've always been proud. Have you? Because your actions suggest otherwise. When I was featured in Forbes, you spent dinner talking about Jessica's sponsored post. When I won the Stanford Entrepreneurship Award, you changed the subject to Mark's promotion at his accounting firm. Mom was crying now. We didn't realize we were doing that. That's the problem, you weren't paying attention. You made assumptions about what my career meant and what my achievements were worth, and you never bothered to verify those assumptions. How do we show you that we want to pay attention now? I started my car and began driving back to my apartment, where I planned to change clothes and meet my classmates for a celebration dinner that would actually focus on our achievements instead of being overshadowed by someone else's news. I don't know, Mom. But I know that it can't start with you suddenly being interested in my life because you discovered I have money. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it has to be because you value me as a person, not because you're impressed by my net worth. We do value you as a person. Then prove it. Figure out how to show genuine interest in my life, my work, my goals, and my achievements without needing a $200 million donation to get your attention. After hanging up, I drove through Palo Alto thinking about the strange dynamics of family recognition. 4 years I'd built a successful company, funded breakthrough medical research and earned recognition in my field, but none of that had seemed to matter to my family. It took a public donation ceremony broadcast on live television to get them to take my career seriously. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Alex, I'm so sorry we didn't come to your graduation. I had no idea you were so successful. Can we talk? I typed back, congratulations on your engagement, Jessica. Enjoy your party. At dinner with my Stanford classmates, I found myself surrounded by people who understood the work I'd been doing, who appreciated the significance of building a biotech investment firm, and who saw the Aurora Institute donation as both a generous gift and a smart investment in future innovation. Alexandra, my friend Michael raised his glass, to someone who's been quietly changing the world while the rest of us were just trying to graduate. As we toasted, I felt something I hadn't experienced with my family in years, genuine recognition, authentic celebration, and the sense that my achievements mattered to the people around me. My phone continued buzzing with messages from family members who had suddenly discovered my success, but I put it on silent. Tonight was about celebrating with people who had known all along that I was building something significant, even when my own family couldn't be bothered to pay attention. 2 weeks later, I was in my Aurora Ventures office reviewing potential investments when my assistant announced that my parents were in the lobby. Should I send them up? Karen asked. I thought about it for a moment. I hadn't spoken to them since graduation day, though they'd sent several messages asking to meet. Yes, send them up. A few minutes later, my parents walked into my office overlooking Silicon Valley. I could see them taking in the environment, the modern furniture, the wall of windows, the conference room where I held meetings with Fortune 500 pharmaceutical companies. Alexandra, thank you for seeing us, Mom said, sitting down across from my desk. What did you want to discuss? Dad looked around the office. We wanted to see where you work. To understand what you've built. This is Aurora Ventures. We identify promising biotech companies and provide funding and expertise to help them develop treatments for diseases that affect millions of people. Can you tell us more about how it works? I studied their faces, looking for signs of genuine curiosity versus polite interest motivated by my wealth. We evaluate scientific research, assess market potential, and provide capital to companies working on breakthrough therapies. Our portfolio includes 12 companies working on treatments for everything from rare genetic disorders to more effective cancer therapies. Mom was taking notes. How do you decide which companies to invest in? We look at the quality of the science, the experience of the management team, the size of the patient population that could benefit from the treatment, and the regulatory pathway to approval. This sounds incredibly complex, Dad said. And incredibly important. It is both of those things. Alexandra, Mom set down her pen, we owe you an enormous apology. Not just for missing your graduation, but for years of not understanding what you were accomplishing. I appreciate that. But more than an apology, we owe you our attention and respect going forward. We want to understand your work, your goals, your life. Not because you have money, but because you're our daughter and we've been failing to see you clearly. I looked at my parents, people who had raised me, supported my education and encouraged my independence, but who had somehow failed to recognize my professional success until it was announced on live television. What does that look like practically? It looks like us asking better questions and listening to your answers, Dad said. It looks like celebrating your achievements instead of treating them as background noise. It looks like recognizing that your career matters as much as anyone else's in the family. And it looks like us understanding that Jessica's engagement party, while important to her, wasn't more important than your Stanford graduation, Mom added. We got our priorities completely backward. I thought about their words and their request for a second chance. If you're serious about rebuilding our relationship, here's what I need from you. I need you to be interested in my work because it matters to me, not because it's lucrative. I need you to celebrate my achievements when they happen, not months later when you accidentally discover them. And I need you to treat my career with the same respect you show for other family members' successes. We can do that, Dad said immediately. Can you? Because it's going to require changing years of habits and assumptions. We're committed to doing the work, Mom said. Alexandra, we've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about all the times we dismissed your achievements or failed to ask follow-up questions about your career. We're ashamed of how we've treated your success. I don't need you to be ashamed. I need you to be different going forward. Then that's what we'll do. Over the next hour, I found myself having the kind of conversation with my parents that I'd been hoping for since I'd started Aurora Ventures. They asked detailed questions about biotech investing, listened carefully to my explanations, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding the work I was passionate about. As they prepared to leave, Mom hugged me tightly. We're proud of you, Alexandra. Not because of the money or the donation, but because of the work you're doing to help people. We should have been saying that all along. Thank you. That means a lot. Will you have dinner with us next week? Dad asked. We'd like to hear more about the Aurora Institute and your plans for the research programs. I smiled. I'd like that. 6 months later, I was having Sunday dinner with my parents when Mom's phone buzzed with a notification. Oh, Jessica posted photos from her wedding planning meeting, she said, glancing at the screen. I waited to see if the conversation would immediately shift to Jessica's wedding details, as it would have in the past. Instead, Mom put her phone aside. She looks happy. But tell me more about the clinical trial results you mentioned. Did the gene therapy treatment show the improvements you were hoping for? And I knew that something had fundamentally changed in how my family saw me and valued my achievements. It had taken a very public $200 million donation to get their attention, but once they started paying attention, they discovered something they should have recognized years earlier, that I had been building something meaningful all along. The difference was that now they were choosing to see it.